Okay, so continue. Go.
All right. So, Scott, thanks for doing this. I'm curious, how did you discover Star Trek and what inspired you about it?
How did I discover Star Trek and what inspired me about it? When I grew up in the Bay Area, I'm a kid of the 70s, and every day KTVU Channel 2 showed Star Trek at 5 p.m. And so every day, my brother and I would wait till my dad got home from work. My dad drove a truck for Pepsi Cola. And my dad would get home, and then every night, in front of the TV with TV trays, we'd watch Star Trek. And that became just the tradition in our house. And Star Trek was such a big part of my life growing up. There was the Mego Star Trek toys and the Gold Key Star Trek comics. And all of that to me was Star Trek. And it just became such a formative thing. Even before Star Wars, Star Trek and comic books were basically kind of the baseline for my childhood. Got
I absolutely love that. I remember watching reruns too, and I had the list of the episodes to make sure I saw them all. And then I accidentally fell asleep during one, and I had to wait till the next round.
No!
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it was a third season episode, so you can figure out when I finally saw it, I was a little bit disappointed.
No.
Exactly.
Fox Brain?
Actually, it was Requiem for Methuselah.
Oh, that's actually one of the better third season ones. At least that one at least thinking about something.
Well, at least the idea was interesting, but the execution.
And it doesn't have McCoy walking Spock around with a Game Boy.
That's true. How did you get involved then working with the Star Trek comics?
How did I get involved working with Star Trek comics? At the time, I had just started writing for IDW. I was writing their comics based on the Joss Whedon show Angel. And I had been doing that for a bit. I had done a couple other short anthology comics for them. And I was just sort of getting my feet wet into writing comics. And then that was when IDW first landed the Star Trek license. And at that time, it was being run very hands-on by IDW's editor-in-chief, Chris Ryle. And so I emailed Chris, and I was like, hey, man, look, I'm not saying give me the job. You can't just give me the job. I don't have enough credits yet. Just open the door for me. Just let me pitch. Just like, open the door, crack. And once you open the door for me, I'll get in there. I'll sell it. But just give me a chance to make the pitch and get in the meeting. And so he did, and I pitched them the idea for my first Star Trek graphic novel, which was Blood Will Tell. And I pitched them on the idea of basically doing Rashomon with classic Trek, where we go back through every classic appearance of the Klingons and show it from the Klingon point of view, where this damn pain-in-the-ass Kirk keeps showing up. And they liked the idea, and as it turned out, that turned out to be the third thing I think I published, because before that, I did an issue of, or two of Alien Spotlight. But that was my way in. And luckily, I mean, CBS, who ultimately makes the decisions as far as what books get made along with IDW, CBS seems to like what I do and like what we do, and we've been working with it pretty much ever since. It's been a great run.
I'm a huge fan of you both, for the record. So I do want to know, how does the writing process work for you, especially since you're writing with someone else and it's your brother? So I'm curious about that, and keep in mind that I will be talking to him too.
Oh yeah, no, I think today what, at 3 o'clock?
Yeah.
Like that? Yeah. How does the writing process work? Well, when I first got the very first Star Trek assignment, I called up my brother David, and I said, look, you know that you and I both have the same ideas about what makes a really good Star Trek story. And as I'm writing this, I'm going to be bothering you constantly and calling you to talk about this. So, and my brother was working in another field entirely. And I'm like, look, why don't you come in and write this with me? That way I can bother you all day long and then keep you harassing you and not feel like I'm wasting your time. And after we do this first one, if you don't like it, you're out. But if you do like it, it's good. And so we started working together on that very first one, and it's worked out great, and we've been doing it ever since. As far as the writing process goes, it's a combination of being very collaborative and then very separate, which I think people are surprised by, but it works out really well. When we first comes to like coming up with the idea for the series, David and I will put the pitch together and talk it out and decide what we want to be doing with the storyline. And then we'll break down the series into what the issues are going to be, or the chapters. And then when it comes to each individual script, we'll have a meeting and we'll break down what's going to happen in that specific issue, in those 22 or 20 pages, depending on how much room we have. And from that point on, once we've got the beats of that issue down, we'll just lop it in half and then adjourn to separate quarters, and then not even talk about it. And then once I've got my half done, I'll send it to him, or if he gets it done before I do, he'll send it to me. And then once we put the two pieces together, then we'll go back together and then get on the phone and do a complete polish of the issue line by line so that everything sounds right and everything is lining up. And the advantage to that is that we have the idea as a whole for the entire series or the entire script or the entire story, but we both have the ability to surprise each other. And I will say David does this more so than I do, where I'll get his half back and all of a sudden he's taking a left turn I wasn't expecting. And it's always great stuff. And it gives me the ability to be surprised by something and take it in a new direction. I remember whenever we were working on the Doctor Who anniversary series, Prisoners of Time. And that one was especially fun because, you know, as much as Star Trek leans a bit more towards hard science fiction, Doctor Who is kind of more science fiction fantasy. So we could do things that we had never done before. And so in that one, I think it was the third Doctor story, and it's set during the 70s. And I get the pages back from David, and all of a sudden there's a big Richard Nixon scene, which we had not discussed and I did not anticipate. And we're great. And so I get on the phone, I'm like, where did Nixon come from? And he's like, I don't know, man. It just felt like it needed Nixon in there. All right, good. It's great. So that comes up a lot. That happened a lot on the recent series we did, the Q conflict, which was insane because we were dealing with all the crews together. And I would get pages back and not to give away, it's not really a spoiler. In the final issue of that series, we have this massive war between all of the Star Trek crews, and Q is just summoning every alien you can think of. And we have Trelane on this horse in this famous Napoleon painting, a reference to that painting. It's a great moment, and it feels very Trelane, and we had planned that. But then we get to the end of the issue where Q and the Starfleet captains are signing their detente in like a big UN council type meeting, and the horse is in the meeting. And I'm like, why is the horse there? Because I don't know, I just thought the horse should be there. And it just cracked me up. And so those are the kind of things that working with a co-writer that you trust can really let you bring to the table. Cut.
I got to talk to you about Q conflict.
Yeah, ask some questions.
Well, I love how you, and we talked about this here. So you bring in all the original series characters that could be Q, but never talked about being Q, like Trelane and the Metrons, and then bringing in all the crews and then dividing them up like survivor tribes.
Yeah.
I absolutely. So I got to ask, where did this even come from? And talk to me about that process.
The series itself came about because I got a call from the then president of IDW, Greg Goldstein. And Greg just called me up and said, hey, we want a really big Star Trek series, a big crossover. We haven't done a big crossover series in a while. I want an event book. And I'm like, great, what do you got in mind? He goes, I don't know, figure it out. I want to use all the crews. CBS is already fine with that. Go figure it out. I'm, oh, okay, sure. So I called David, and David's like, what does that mean? I don't know. Let's figure something out with all the crews. And so the idea of if for that many captains and that many characters, what's the threat going to be? What's got to be Q? And then that went to, well, let's bring in every Q type character. And from that point on, it was just, how can we make this as big and bombastic and crazy as we can, but still make it feel honest, still make it feel like a Star Trek story. If the story doesn't have a point to us, if we can't communicate something about the human condition, which I think Star Trek has always been best at, then it just becomes fan service, and we never want to do that. We want our goal is always to write stories that could be filmed as episodes. And this would be the most expensive episode ever. It'd be fantastic. But that's always our goal. And so for the idea of using all the crews, I mean, that sounded so ambitious, but what made that interesting besides just the fact that we were doing it? And my notion was, well, let's treat it like a fantasy football draft where they're picking teams, and mixing up all these crews would give us so much opportunity to see things that Star Trek fans and readers had never seen before, character interactions, character moments. And that was the real appeal of that series. That was my favorite thing about it. I mean, the tough thing was every issue coming up with ways to raise the stakes. And I think we did an okay job. Readers seemed to really enjoy it, and just getting to play with some of the stuff like the Prophets and Deep Space Nine and the Doomsday Machine, and trying to just keep ratcheting up the tension and ratcheting up the danger and making it bigger and bigger. That was one of the most fun things about that series.
Well, I also have to ask, just for curiosity, who was the last character picked in the teams?
Oh, it's Quark. It's got to be Quark. Who needs a bartender? Really?
Good point. Could you talk about working on Sitting the Edge Forever with Harlan Ellison, and how did that come about?
Yeah, sure. I had been lucky enough years before to have had a couple of encounters with Harlan, including at the time I owned a comic book store in North Hollywood, and my partner and I handled the sale of a piece of Harlan's comic book collection, which Harlan's comic book collection is legendary, and it's in like a money bin style hidden vault in his house, like Uncle Scrooge. I think at night he goes inside, and he used to go swim around in it like Uncle Scrooge would. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. But anyway, because of that, Harlan knew who I was. I was kind of a known quantity to him, not necessarily as a writer, but he was somebody that he had some contact with and had a connection to. And again, this is Chris Ryle at IDW. He'd been trying to make that work and try and kind of get Harlan and CBS back on the same page almost his entire time that they had the license. Because Harlan had famously had conflicts with CBS over that episode and the merchandising of it. And so just getting them all to come to the table and getting Harlan to agree that it was a good idea, that was a feat I never expected to be possible. And that was all Chris. But then it became a matter of, well, who's gonna actually work with Harlan on this? And because of in part because of my connection to Harlan, and also in part because of our connection to J.K. Woodward, who they wanted to do the art because of his amazing fully painted art. And we've been working with him on books in the past. We did the Doctor Who, Star Trek series together, and we're a good unit as far as producing that kind of work. And so they pitched us to CBS, and they pitched us to Harlan, and Harlan signed on to it. And our goal with that one was like, I never considered myself a writer on that book. It's like, it was more like being a director, in that we took Harlan's teleplay, and it said, our job is to take this as if we put this in the hands of people back in 67, and said, don't change a word, just film it. So we wanted it to look not only as close to what Harlan conceives, but also as close to what the production people at the time would have done with it. So while there's entirely new characters that we had to visually conceive that were in Harlan's script, at the same time, if something wouldn't have changed, we didn't change it. Edith Keeler still looks like Joan Collins. Kirk and Spock are still dressed in the wardrobe that they wore in the episode. But so our goal was always, we want to make this Harlan's book. And so that first script, we just labored over that first script, and we have Harlan's teleplay to work from, and we did not change a letter of dialogue. Everything's exactly there. Everything that he has, and he's got some great stuff in that teleplay. He gives Janice Rand this kind of command and agency that we never saw in the series, where because time's been changed, all of a sudden Kirk and his crew are besieged by like space pirates, and they're like burning down the door with a phaser to get in. And Kirk just turns to Rand and says, I need you to hold them off as long as possible. And she's just like, I can do it. And there's just like resolve that the Harlan describes the script and that J.K. captured so well in his painting. And we never saw that character have that moment in the series. It's so great. But so that first script, it's all done and we submit it and we hadn't heard anything back. And I remember because it was Thanksgiving and I was up north in San Francisco at my dad's house. And it was Thanksgiving night. And all of a sudden my dad's landline rings. Not my cell phone, my dad's house phone rings. And I pick it up. Hey kid, it's Harlan. Harlan, hey, happy Thanksgiving. What's up? I gotta tell you, kid, that first script was fantastic. You guys just nailed it. First, I just kind of slumped. Oh, and I'm like, Harlan, how did you get this number? Oh, I'm everywhere, kid. Don't worry about it. It's the perfect Harlan answer. Yeah, that book is something special to me. Not just because we worked so hard to make it a Harlan book, and there were some things that we did have to change. It can't be helped because Harlan's teleplays are very cinematic. I mean, he describes the kind of camera moves he wants, and so some of that you just can't capture in comics. But there's the scene where Kirk is with Joan Collins, Edith Keeler, on the steps in their apartment building, and in his description, the camera swings up the stairs and looks around and reveals Spock watching them from above because he knows that Edith Keeler has to die. And we can't get that move, but so we found a way to orient the panels in such a way to kind of give you that impression for that Spock reveal in the same way that Harlan tried to do it with the camera. And we had stuff like that, but at the same time, there would be, again, the benefit of collaborating in comics is the ability to be surprised. The big finish of that book were the Guardians of Forever, who, unlike in the TV show, which I love, it's probably my favorite episode, but still the Guardians are a big donut. In the comics, the Guardians are beings. And when they punish the Beckwith character, it's described as this horrible, unending Mobius loop of death. And J.K. took our description of it based on Harlan's and then came back with this amazing page that I would have never imagined how to get on paper. And it's fantastic. So that's another real highlight from that book. But I think the biggest highlight for me is when the book was all finished and IDW made this absolutely gorgeous hardcover collection of it. And they had Harlan write the foreword and a piece at the end too. But in the foreword, Harlan describes me and my brother as his paladins of the original dream. I still get choked up when I think about it. I mean, if I want anything on my tombstone, it's paladin of the original dream. It's fantastic. So yeah, that book is a favorite. Cut.
Oh, I absolutely love that story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So I have to ask also, I write novels. I can't imagine writing comics. What is the difference in writing? And how do you write a comic as opposed to how you write a novel? What are the differences?
How do you write a comic as compared to writing a novel? I've never written a long form novel. I've written lots of long form nonfiction, lots of essays, and the difference is really it's much more like writing a screenplay. But this is kind of the common misconception, and I get this question a lot from people who want to write comics, or they want me to read their comic scripts. And the most important thing to remember, I mean, as far as the storytelling and plot mechanics, that's kind of the same whether you're writing for comics or TV or novels or whatever. And knowing what your characters want, knowing what you're trying to say with your themes, knowing what your plot is. But in terms of just the mechanics of writing for comics, and this is what I get whenever I look at scripts from people who start writing comics. The most important thing to remember is that comics are it's not the same medium as television or film, and it's just a series of still images. So every single panel has to be a frozen moment in time, and all the movement happens in your mind between one panel and the next. So I'll get these scripts that people will ask me to read, and the panel description will be Batman runs across the room, opens a window, fires off his grapple gun, and leaps out into the night. And I'm like, well, that's great, but that's 4 panels. And so that's the biggest, I think the biggest thing that people who come from writing for film and television or come from writing novels, where you have with novels, you have the gift of an endless description, is you have to pare down your description to what's happening in that moment. Other than that, the other thing too is the notion that whether it's writing for a comic that's going to be printed or on a digital comic, every page has to have some sort of, even to the smallest degree, some sort of cliffhanger, something that makes you go, oh, what happens next, and make you turn that page. So to a certain degree, every comic is a series of 22 small endings that have to lead you forward and want you to keep reading. Yeah, cut. That's all I got at that.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you. What element of the Star Trek franchise do you want to tackle but have not had the opportunity to yet?
What part of the Star Trek universe would I like to tackle? We've been really lucky. We've gotten to work with just about everything. Right now we're working on Deep Space Nine, which is probably the one we've done the least work with, and some of the characters I like the most. So that's currently I'm really currently enjoying that. We've gotten to work on lots of classic Trek, lots of Next Generation. We've got to do some really crazy stuff like the Klingons and some of the alien stuff. I got to write a Gorn issue. I've gotten to find ways to bring in Captain Pike here and there, which I love, the Captain Pike character. And we get to do the really crazy stuff. I mean, we got to do Star Trek versus Planet of the Apes and Star Trek Doctor Who, and we've got to do the Star Trek Zombies crossover when IDW did Infestation. So we tend to get the really fun stuff. I think the one thing that we haven't done yet, even though we've used some aspects of it in our book, is we haven't gotten to really do some stuff in the Star Trek animated. I love Ayers, I love Mares, and I love that filmation style. I've lately been on a real filmation kick, as you know, I've got more time to do a little TV binging while we're all sheltering in place. And the filmation TV shows, I mean, the animation was super limited, and they would reuse a lot of the animation because those guys were trying to do all their work in the country and not ship it out. So they tried to keep all the animation done in-house in Hollywood. And as a result, they were cutting as many corners as they could to stay within their budgets. So you're not going to get great animation, but Filmation's designs were fantastic. Those designs for the animated Star Trek characters are great. And I would love to do a story, or get a chance to do a series or a story in that animated style, especially with the Ayers character. That's because I brought in Ayers in a couple of our books. I try and use that alien race with the big third arm in the front. I try and bring him in whenever I can, but I get it. Star Trek animated is probably the last one I'm really dying to get my hands on.
I would love to see you do that, and I did one of the nods just now for you, like they always do there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what is your favorite Star Trek series and your favorite episode of that series?
A favorite series, I mean, if you ask me this again on a different day, you'll get a different answer, but it's always going to be either the classic originals or Next Generation. I mean, those are where my two biggest investments are in that, because classic that's the Trek I grew up on. That's the Trek I fell in love with. And then with Next Generation, when that came out, that was my experience in getting to enjoy new Star Trek, where I was getting new episodes every week, which I wasn't as a kid. As a kid, I always knew Star Trek. I loved it, but it was still a thing of the past. It was an old thing that I was discovering new, but I knew it was a thing of the 60s. And with Next Generation, this is a new thing that I was much more invested in. It felt like mine. So of the two, I would say, today I'll say Next Gen. You ask me tomorrow, it'll be Classic Trek. But those are my two my two biggest my two favorites. As far as episodes go, it's got to be City on the Edge Forever. That episode is just people have often asked me since I wrote the adaptation of Harlan's, which do I like better? And I can't answer that either because I love them both. I mean, Harlan's script by itself is just this jewel, But that episode is fantastic. That episode just has so much pathos and so much heart. Shatner's acting in that episode is amazing. Nimoy is heartbreaking in it, in a role where he can't show emotion and yet shows so much. That episode is probably the tops for me. I think number 2 would probably be Measure of a Man for Next Generation. The courtroom scene and Patrick Stewart's speech at the end with when Day is on trial, whether or not he's sentient, and when he has the Weasley Maddox on the stand. Seems self-aware to me, Commander. Oh, I love that episode. So it's probably City on the Edge, but Measure of a Man is real close.
Oh, that's awesome. And in fact, I had a chance to talk to Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote Measure of a Man. So that
cool.
was so much fun. Top 2 favorite Star Trek characters.
Top 2 favorite Star Trek characters. It's got to be Kirk and Picard. Again, I mean, Kirk is just the classic swashbuckling hero, but he's also intelligent. He's the trickster. Yeah, the Kirk character is fantastic. But then Picard's right up there too. I love. It seems as if Picard was definitely conceived to be a counterpoint to Kirk, in that he's great kind of in the ways that Kirk is good, but Kirk's not known for. So with Picard, you have more the thinking man's captain, and he's much more the negotiator. And I confess, toward the end of the series and in the films, and it's understandable, there's this, and I think I'm mostly not part of Patrick Stewart, the desire to make Picard more of an action hero, which when you see it is cool. But I like the more cerebral, leaning back Picard from the early seasons. Like, I think there's an episode early on where he's talking to, I think it's Nagilum, this awful alien, horrible creature who's trying to make his way back in the universe. And this creature's trying to goad Picard into releasing him. And Picard just like leaning back like, there's a slyness about Picard that I love. And they would occasionally show. And yeah, Picard and Kirk are the 2.
Oh, I remember that episode well.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the episode where it was Die Hard on the Enterprise with Picard running around with a gun.
Starship Mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
What do you see as the future of Star Trek?
What do I see as the future of Star Trek? What I'm seeing right now, which is great, is that the success of Discovery and Picard in the age of streaming, what it's doing is it's bringing in new fans who now, thanks to streaming, can discover these series. I mean, I think Deep Space Nine, and especially I think even more so Voyager, those fan bases are really expanding because of the availability of those series on Netflix, where I think Voyager, to a large degree, kind of never got the credit it deserved for doing some really innovative stuff and some great storytelling. And now people are going back there and realizing it. Same with Deep Space Nine, where people are realizing how much Deep Space Nine was the first TV series to really embrace the long form storytelling and story arcs that everyone is so used to now. And now it's kind of like de rigueur. This is the way television storytelling works for drama. And no one was doing it with Deep Space Nine. And even Deep Space Nine, they couldn't advertise they were doing it because the network didn't want it. The syndicators didn't want it. They wanted one-off episodes. So DS9 kind of snuck that into their storytelling. And when you go back and now look at the way they did it, it's remarkable stuff. So that's the best thing about the new stuff happening, besides the merits of the shows themselves, are that it's just creating new generations of Star Trek fans. And like any sort of shared universe or any sort of mythology, without new people coming to it, falling in love with it, and then eventually being able to work on it themselves and bring their own perspectives and bring their own experiences to that thing, it otherwise it'll wither and die, and it just becomes a thing of the past. No one thinks about something like a Space Patrol or even Lost in Space as being something that's vital these days. Although the Lost in Space series on Netflix is pretty good, but it doesn't seem like something that's vital and is now, as current, as dynamic. And the benefits of Discovery and Picard is it's taking Star Trek, bringing it back out there, encouraging people to go back and just really dive into these hundreds and hundreds of episodes, but also taking it to new places, which it needs to go to be alive. It's much the way Disneyland exists and the way Walt Disney talked about it. People would say, well, how can you take out my attraction? I love that ride. Or why are you changing it? And Walt used to always say that Disneyland's not a museum. It's got to change. It's got to reflect what the people, while coming in now, love and are interested in. And it should always be different. It should always be going new places. And Star Trek's much the same.
Comparing Star Trek to Disneyland, I gotta love that.
No, don't get me started on the Star Trek experience. Oh, that still kills me. They tore that place down. Did you ever get to go in Vegas?
I did, loved it.
Oh my God, unreal. Did you ever hear?
You're standing there, and all of a sudden you're like beamed up. I'm like, what?
Did you ever hear the secret of how that works?
No, you gotta tell me.
Do you want me to tell you? I'm gonna ruin it for you if you want to know.
Oh, go for it. Tell me about their secret for the experience.
Because you remember, you would go in that little room. This is the Star Trek experience, much lamented in Las Vegas, at that Las Vegas Hilton. And you would go into corridors, and it looked like a cheesy simulator ride, like there was in every other casino in Vegas. And you would go in this little room, and there'd be a screen up there, and they're playing like the cheesy, welcome to the Star Trek ride video. And then all of a sudden, there'd be this flash of blinding white light, and this whoosh of air around you, and literally in a split second, you're in the transporter room. The floor beneath you is a transporter pad. It's a fully scaled exact replica, and then all of a sudden there's a startled crewman screaming at you, "Red alert, we gotta go!" And you get hauled out of there, and you're running through the corridors of the Enterprise, and it's all full scale, exactly accurate, and then running into the bridge. It's amazing. But that effect of the transporter room, unbelievable. And what it was, you were in that room, and the floor beneath you was just black. And then there was the walls and the ceiling around you. And that shell that was over you was attached to a giant cantilever there'd be a huge weight on this side, and they would pull a switch, and in the blink of an eye, boom, that thing would fly up. In a split second, the ceiling would go over it for the top of the transporter pads. And what they discovered as an accident is that when this happened, and it happened so fast, it created this whoosh of air that felt really bizarre and weird, like being transported. It was purely an accident. And they tried it for the first time, and people lost their minds. I can't believe this worked so well. It was the most amazing effect I'd ever seen in any sort of like theme park ride.
I totally missed that. I want to go back and do it. I want to take my kids to it. Oh,
yeah. It killed.
I keep hoping they'll do it again.
I know. It was unreal how good it was.
Yeah, I can't understand. Well, anyway, bring it back.
Yeah.
You and I will fight. We'll bring it back.
Yeah.
So wondering if you could do the Space the Final Frontier for me. And then when you're done, give me a Live Long and Prosper.
Oh, of course. Space, the Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. A little Shatner in there for you. And of course, you got Live Long and Prosper.
That is fantastic. Hang on. I appreciate you doing this. Hang on. I'm going to stop us recording.
Okay. Oh, by the way, if you want, I can tell you the story of going into Harlan's comic book ball.
Oh, you got to tell me the story. Go for it.
Okay. I mentioned that my partner and I were asked by Harlan to handle the sale of a piece of his comic book collection, again, which is legendary. So I go up to his house in the hills, the lost Aztec temple on Mars. It's this amazing house with like ruins on the outside that look like Aztec ruins, but you look closer and they're flying saucers and aliens and Martians carved into the ruins of the house. And we go inside there, and we go into Harlan's library, which is amazing. It's this amazing, huge 3-story library. And we're in the middle of the room, and Harlan looks at me and goes, "Kid, no offense, but I just don't trust you, so I got to blindfold you before I take you into the vault. I can't let you know where it's at." I looked at my partner, And Judd had known Harlan for a while, and Judd and Harlan were very close. And Judd just looks at me. I'm like, Harlan, it's your world, man. Whatever you want to do, I'm fine with it. So they blindfold me, and I feel Judd's hands on my back, and they push me into somewhere. And then they take the blindfold off of me, and I'm in the vault. And Harlan's vault had giant bookcases on tracks, like the kind with the big spinning wheels like you see on submarines. And so the shelves would move and you could see it. And just all these comics just on library shelves, some not even in bags and boards, but they're all in immaculate condition. And so he's pulling out the stuff he's decided he wants to sell. And there's this gorgeous original art on the walls. And Harlan, I hear you still have your Captain Marvel comics from when you were a kid. He goes, oh, of course. The shelves go passing by, and he just pulls a handful out. And there's Wiz Comics and Captain Marvel Adventures and Mary Marvel. And they're not even in bags, but they look like they're just came off of the rack at the drugstore in 1945. They're amazing condition. It's gorgeous. And so we pack up the boxes of the stuff he wanted to sell. And I'm like, all right, Harlan, you can blindfold me. Good to go. He's like, nah, you did good in here, kid. I trust you. Come on out. And so I know where it is in the house, but I still have no idea how to access it or anything else about it. I couldn't find it again. And so we're walking out, and as we're walking down, I told Harlan, Harlan, I just got hired by IDW and CBS to write the Star Trek Doctor Who crossover. And Harlan looks at me and he goes, you poor dumb bastard. Harlan was a great guy. I still miss him.
Oh my God, I can't stop laughing. That is such a great story.
Yeah, I love that guy.
I wish I'd gotten to meet him. He sounds like from what you're saying, what I've heard from others, he's a total character for sure.
Yeah. The biggest secret about Harlan is that he was a really sweet guy and he didn't want anybody to know.
Well, I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you so much for doing this. Hang on a second.
Yeah,